Ladies and gentlemen, get ready for Jacob Walker.
So in 2000, I got a call from my mom. I had just gotten home from work. It's unusual for her to call me in the evening. We usually talk on the weekends. This was a weekday. And I picked up the phone and she said, "Hey, Dad's in need of a kidney transplant. Wanted to see if you consider being a donor." Without hesitation, I said, "Yes. It's my dad, it's Pops. It's a done deal." She said, "Great." We hung up the phone. She told me she would call me later with the details. Later that evening, I thought a little bit more about it. I didn't really sure how they do a transplant. What did this mean? And I didn't know Dad was doing that bad. My dad, Sylvester Walker Sr., was born in Alabama, and he survived Jim Crow and the racism of the South and made his way to Gary, Indiana. We had his wife and his 5 kids. I was the most amazing one. That never gets old. My siblings are somewhere watching, they'll see this. So. And my dad was an electrical journeyman by trade. And I have his journeyman's card on me at all times. It's one of my most prized possessions. It's how he took care of us, how he took care of his family. My dad was also a deacon at our local church, so he was a man of faith. To me, he was just Superman. And if Superman needed me, it wasn't a problem. My dad was also a giver. Now, he wasn't going to give you any money. I describe him as somebody that was thoughtful with his dollars. He gave his talents. So I remember we went to a Kojic church. Wait a minute now. It started on time. And as the Spirit went, you never knew when it was going in. But my dad would be in the back on a ladder, up in the rafters doing electrical work. He gave his talents. My dad also gave his talents to the community. Everybody knew he was an electrician and a journeyman. So people would ask him to do work around the community. And I remember my neighbor asked him to install a motion light above her place in the garage. She was a single mom. When she came home, it would just make her a little bit more safe as she came in. And I remember one day I was in the kitchen. My dad was at the kitchen table. My mom was at the sink near the window. And you could see out back, and this bright light came shining through the window in the kitchen. And I got up to look out with her. And my neighbor, who my dad installed the light for, came home. The light was so bright. She got all the stuff out of the car, went in the house, and it was great. And my mom didn't miss a beat. She didn't turn her back to look at my dad. She says, "Here I am married to an electrician, and I don't have a motion light at my house." So not long after, a motion light was installed at 542 Matthew Street where we grew up. My dad was Superman, but he wasn't stupid. My dad was a hard worker. So I didn't really get to know him when I was growing up. So it was like living with a stranger. We were poor, so my dad worked a lot. Back then, you could work double and triple shifts. My dad would go to work on a Monday. I might not see him the Thursday because he was working, and that's the best way to provide for us. We were poor, so he wanted to make sure we had as much as we could. But he didn't have the blueprint for fatherhood. He thinks he met his dad once. Now, his dad was a Rolling Stone, and he made his way to Michigan. So I believe I have some family here somewhere in the state that I don't know. So if I look like somebody you might know, just talk to me after the show. But he worked so much that his body started to give out on him. He had a host of health issues, hypertension, high blood pressure, and ultimately diabetes, where he needed a kidney transplant.
It's all right.
So if Superman needed me, it wasn't a problem. It got to the point where it was time to go through the process to see if I'd be an eligible donor. Now, I warn you, this isn't for the faint of heart. Every time I went to get tested or run different tests, they would take blood. These people are like vampires. They would take several vials every time I went. And this one nurse was so bad. She took blood and bruised my arm, and it hurt for days after. To this day, if I go get a physical, I can't even sit still. I think she scarred me for life. But ultimately, I was found to be a suitable donor. I was the right blood type. I was healthy enough so I could do it. So we moved forward in the process. And I remember the day I went to the hospital to start the transplant. Only thing I remember about that day is the doctor came to me, explained what was going on. The anesthesia came in and said, count from 100 to 0 by ones. I got to 99, I woke up, my kidney was gone. And later, I found out my dad was doing okay. We had made it. Superman was okay. Now, this is what they don't tell you. The recovery period. So I'm laying in this bed. So before I did all this, I was living in Atlanta. And I was having a good time. Moving around. I may have went to Freaknik 3 times. And I wanted to get back to Atlanta, but I couldn't. I was here in Chicago, laying in a hospital bed, trying to recover. And I got really depressed, kind of down on myself. I wanted to get back to my good time. And the nurse came and talked to me. She said, look, if you ever want to get out of here, you have to get up and move. And I asked the doctor, when can I go home? He said, you can go when you can go. What the hell does that mean? Well, what happens is your body kind of loses certain bodily functions. And I couldn't go. Thank you. That was harder the first time. And in order to do that, I had to get up and move. So the nurse, I had these IVs hooked to my arm, all these tubes coming at me, and she taught me how to lean on this cart where the machines were hooked to, and it rolled. And if I leaned on it, I could get up and move and hopefully get my body restarted. So I got up, leaning on this cart, got this ugly gown on, my butt was sticking out, ashy as hell. And just walking around the halls of the hospital. And at one point, it was this figure down the hall. I saw him, Latin gentleman, and he motioned for me to come talk to him. He yelled out, "Mi amigo, you come talk to me." What else the hell I got to do? So I made my way down and talked to him. He asked me to take a seat, talk to him for a while. And he was so elated. He had just gotten a kidney himself. He just kept saying over and over, "We are so blessed to be here. God, we are so blessed to be here." He just kept repeating that to me. And his words changed my mind. It changed my thinking. I was blessed. If you're in a position to give, you are blessed. And I could give to my Father. And so I got up from that conversation with a little more pep in my step and started to make my rounds around the hospital. The next day, I went looking for this gentleman because I wanted to thank him for his words. And I went to the nurse's station and I described him. If a sketch artist asked me today, I could tell you exactly what he looked like. They had no record of anybody in the hospital that looked like this. I know what I saw. And so finally, it came. Number 2. It felt so good. And I could go home. And as I left, I thought about it. I had more time with my dad now. More time to work on our relationship that we didn't have before. So in the coming days and months, I would go see him and got to know him a lot more. So after that, I went back home to Georgia, but ultimately I ended up moving to Michigan back in 2009. It was in March, and it was cold. So I always describe my time in Michigan. I say it's cold, these cold 10 years. And I remember when I went to work, and it was supposed to snow the next day I started. I went to my leader and said, hey, if it snows tomorrow, what do we do? He said, we come to work. I didn't like his tone. But in that same month, my mother went into the hospital and she never came home. But there was a silver lining. Because I was here in Michigan, I could go back and forth to Indiana where they lived, and I got to spend a lot of time with her before she left. And I remember the last time her and I spoke, I had an unction that morning. I would go to visit her in Gary and my dad, and I would leave like 4 in the morning. If you've ever drove 94 between here and Chicago, you know why. The traffic is terrible. They're still working on that highway. So I would leave early, but I had this unction to get up and go see her in the hospital before I went. And I remember our last conversation. And she knew it would be the last time I would see her. And she hugged me like she hugged me to life. And I remember laying across her crying, and she wiped the tears from my eyes as to say goodbye to me. The next day I called in, and she was no longer here. But even up until that point in the face of death, her concern was for me and my tears. I have no better description for a mother. The next year in 2010, I got the best gift I ever could have gotten. It was the birth of my daughter, AJ. Her and my mother share a birthday. So baby girl, I know you're watching. Daddy loves you. I'll talk to you soon. I've got your Christmas gifts. So over the coming days and weeks, I still went to go see my dad. And we got to talk, got to hang out, we got to do a lot more. I would take him to run his errands, take him to the bank. He still would go to the bank. And we got closer. I got to spend a lot of time with him. Then I had this bright idea in 2013. Let's go on a road trip. I hate driving. And I remember this voice in the back of my head, what the hell are you thinking? We hate driving. Why would you offer this? But he got excited about it. And we planned it. We did it. I said I would go. My daughter was living in Georgia at the time with her mom. I would pick him up in Gary. We would pick her up in Georgia. And then we would just go about and go visit Alabama where my mother was buried. Boy, it sounded like a great idea. Can you imagine traveling with a aging old man and a 3-year-old toddler? And my daughter, when are we gonna get there? What's going on? Every hotel, do they have cooked to order breakfast? Like, you're 3 years old. What the heck you know about cooked to order breakfast? Who raised you? Well, and my dad kept wanting to stop and buy drinks. And he had problems with his prostate, so he was always having to go to the bathroom. So we'd buy a drink and then stop at the town to go to the bathroom. Never gonna get where we're going. And then we would stop in every small town between Gary, Georgia, and Alabama. He wanted to buy a newspaper. He had problems with his sight. You can't even read the damn things. We ain't never gonna get where we're supposed to go. I just wanted to leave them all on the side of the road. Somebody would take care of them. I just wanted to kill them. But we finally found ourselves in Alabama at my mother's gravesite. And at first sight, my daughter runs to the grave and starts to clean it off. And she says, it can't look like this. She started to brush the leaves off of it. And me and my dad looked at each other. Something happened in that moment. And whatever problems we had was gone. It didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was this moment. And I believe in my heart my mother orchestrated this from the grave. She wanted us here at this time. And in this moment, I was so grateful for it. And I didn't want to kill him anymore. Figured I'd take him home. But it was such a good time. We got to spend a lot of time together. So we went home and it was good. And me and my dad, we got to spend a lot more time together. I would still go visit him. But this one time I went to visit him. And I came in the house like I would normally would. And he had this look on his face. He spoke to me with real intent. I need to talk to you. I said, Dad, what's up? No, I need to talk to you. I'm like, okay, I came in the house. Kind of put his arms on me. He said, you look at me. I need you to listen to me. I'm having trouble remembering things. I need you to hear me. I'm not crazy. I need you to listen to me. And in the coming weeks, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia. So the time I had bought was running out. And his health started to fail quickly. By that time, my older sister had moved home to take care of him full time. He needed full-time care. And I thank her for that. She gave her life. God bless her for doing that. Not many people would do that. And my weekend trips just weren't enough. And it got to a point when I would go see him. It was like talking to a stranger. He would forget and remember less every time I would see him, to the point he didn't recognize me. And the last times I went to see him, he didn't remember anything. And he ended up in the hospital, and the nurses, they had to tie him to the bed because he was fighting for his life, but he was out of his mind because he didn't recognize anybody. He wasn't Superman anymore. He was just human. And this was sort of the end for him. And I remember one of the last times I went to go see him, I would just sit on his bedside and just talk to him. And hopefully something would sink in and he would remember. And I told him I was going to take my daughter to Disney World for her 5th birthday. And my dad, this one final moment, he sat up and he looked at me and smiled. It was that sign of approval that I was able to do something for him, for my daughter, that he would never be able to do for us. And my daughter would be okay. His granddaughter would be okay. She had me. And the stories of that trip we still talk about. My daughter remembers those times. She didn't know at the time I wanted to kill her, but now she knows. And so we have these memories of my father that still live with me, and I'm grateful for that. And so I'll leave you all with this. You don't know how much time you're ever going to have with people. You never know the last time you're going to see them. There's a lot of things going on in the world right now, but nothing's more important than loved ones and family. If you have a chance to tell the people around that you love him, you appreciate it, do it. You'll never know the last time you see him. Thank you.
Jacob Walker, everybody. Come on. Real people, real stories.